Now, where is this coming from? I didn't read this off the internet or anything. In the early 90s, I did work for corrections, not as a CO, but more with the psych department. Specifically, I was dealing with, for example, real rapists and real pedophiles, but I did have exposure to other parts of the prison. So I have first-hand knowledge as a former insider with that. Hello, it's October 2024. Now this video is going to be somewhat of a revisit of something that I have discussed in older videos, and it's inspired by some recent conversations that I've had with several people, and I'm going to kind of go over several different points here. And it's important for people to know and understand, because a lot of people don't understand this part of the legal system that I'm going to be addressing here. Now, what I really want to focus on right off the top here is when people are found guilty and they proclaim their innocence, people automatically assume that the system was proper in finding their guilt and assume that the person is just not getting what they want. The reality is this: people who actually commit crimes, especially when they have a long history of committing crimes, yes, when they're initially caught, they proclaim their innocence and they plead not guilty and go through the whole process. It's their right to, I suppose, but really it's just testing to see if the police and the prosecutor have enough information, for example, to convict them, but they know they're guilty. However, we see them once they're convicted, and perhaps they might go through an appeal process, and people have to understand an appeal is not having another trial. Appeals are based on, for example, judicial error. Now, I'm simplifying this because most people watching these videos haven't studied law, let alone practice law, so I'm just trying to simplify this. So appeals are based on judicial error. So if there is an appeal, the defense lawyer could be seeing something, or maybe try to create something that, say the courts did something wrong, somebody did something wrong to have this person convicted. Now, with that set aside, once the person is convicted and they're guilty and they know they're guilty, they do not keep proclaiming their innocence, especially once they are incarcerated for any period of time. They pretty much, not pretty much, but they do just say, yep, I got caught, I did it, and move on. Now, where we see a contrast, a very big contrast, is when you have an innocent person who is, say, charged, and they're proclaiming their innocence. Sometimes there was a crime, but they had nothing to do with it. They had no knowledge of it. A lot of times there's no crime, but it's just stuff that's made up using logical fallacies and so forth. But anyway, an innocent person will say, yeah, I'm innocent, and plead not guilty, go through the trial process, and be convicted. Innocent people being convicted happens every day, and people don't understand at what scale. Where we see the difference is when somebody innocent is convicted, especially when they go to jail, they keep proclaiming their innocence. They just don't throw their hands up and say, yep, I did it. Sometimes a weak-minded person might do that because they start to get convinced that they did do it, and then years down the road, they're actually found not guilty, and they kind of go through some psychological issues there. But that's a very small percentage. But people who are innocent, who are convicted, especially if they go to jail, will keep proclaiming their innocence. And people assume, again, that they're only doing that because they were found guilty and think that they deserve what they get. People need to understand, when a guilty person is finally convicted and the smoke clears, they end up admitting their guilt. And in some cases, depending on what subculture they might belong to, they might even wear that as a badge of honor. But innocent people, when they're convicted, will proclaim their innocence to the end of time, we'll just say. People don't understand that the system does convict innocent people. And this is what the system's really scared of. When we hear, for example, the odd story here and there where somebody enters a courthouse and gets violent or something, people think, oh, look at that criminal. They were found guilty, and look at them. No, somebody just got pushed over the edge, and I'm not condoning that at all, but I'm just saying, guilty people don't do that. But anyway, I just really want to emphasize the difference between when guilty people are finally convicted and smoke clears, they accept it. Innocent people, when they're convicted and the smoke clears, they keep proclaiming their innocence and fighting, sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40 years until they are proven innocent. And this is going to tie into something personal in a moment, but well, actually, I'll just interject that at this point here. With my efforts in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and the 2 wrongful convictions that I have against me have destroyed my life, compounded on top of the fact that I was left partly disabled and dealing with a lot of different things from that as well. And really, and this is part of a few conversations that I've had recently as well, people are saying, well, what would save you at this point? I said, well, someone would have to have some interest in resurrect my case and have the wrongful convictions set aside or something, so I can move on with my life. Because the psychological impact of being wrongfully convicted is huge, and it weighs heavy every day, every night, 24/7. There's no escaping that. The system does convict innocent people, and part of that is to, amongst themselves, is a way to promote the fear in society. This is what we can do, this is what we can get away with. It's sad, but it's true. As well as, for example, to have the illusion of justice. And I remember one of my lawyers telling me that, well, if you think you're going to get a fair trial, this is near the beginning, you're delusional. And went on to talk about the illusion of justice, which is something that the commoner has no idea about, the illusion of justice. And if you understand those words, you know what I'm talking about, you're in the know. And what was really interesting over the years when I was dealing with the courts and the injustice there, even before the conviction, I had access at one point through the Freedom of Information, some materials where one person was telling another person that I'm only angry because I'm not getting the results that I want. I'll never forget reading that. And I believe I did use that in some older video. Can you imagine my reaction, how I felt reading that? Because it almost seemed like these people are like, well, this person's guilty or guilty of something. And based on what I learned later, what was being said about me, they probably figured, yeah, I deserved it, without knowing the actual true story, because I was completely discredited. Yep, he's not getting what he wants, so now he's just... Real guilty people don't go to the extent that I and others like myself go through. But no one really cares. And for the most part, society doesn't really care. Until it impacts them, and then they care. But it reminds me of that story where, what was the title of it? First they came for, and then the story goes on from there. The same idea. Now, one of the biggest problems, for example, here in Canada, is when somebody is accused, charged, going through trial, and convicted, innocent, when it's against two, say, commoners, just average people in society, you can have a trial by jury. But when, for example, in my case, when the false accusers happen to be police officers, there's no opportunity in Canada to have a trial by jury, only by a judge. And in my case, the judge that was selected to hear the criminal matters that I was dealing with had no criminal law experience, sat on a committee, and had ties to the Calgary police. And I had insiders who know this judge very well, telling me other stuff as well, telling me this information, which, what do you do with that information? Especially when no one wants to listen to you. So really, I just wanted to revisit the difference that most people don't understand. Now, where is this coming from? I didn't read this off the internet or anything. In the early 90s, I did work for corrections, not as a CO, but more with the psych department. Specifically, I was dealing with, for example, real rapists and real pedophiles, but I did have exposure to other parts of the prison. So I have first-hand knowledge as a former insider with that, with, for example, real guilty people who are convicted, and in this case incarcerated. Yeah, they just admit their guilt. And as I said, sometimes, depending on what subculture they're part of, wear it as a badge of honor. So I have that perspective, plus also being within the legal system as well. So you can accept what I'm saying or not. It's up to you. That's on you totally. Anyway, that's all I want to say. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
You hear the past stories and you see when a cop does something wrong, you see the unions and you see the politicians stand up for the officer. You don't see anyone stand up for the citizen. They just become a statistic, a number that you're going after. That's what you do in policing. You're trying to do what keeps you out of trouble from all the problems that are internal. Like, I never feared the streets, but I constantly feared other officers. What they fear is that we can get away with whatever we choose to get away with. The laws are to the point where anybody can be locked up pretty much for any time. Like, one of the cases I did in the Senate in Maryland that I testified to was how you can't actually drive a car legally. I mean, it would be impossible. No one can get this car from here to the end of the street completely legally.
So an officer can arrest you at
any point in time. So the ones that are afraid. And that's our standard in policing, is fear. So if you're afraid, you can do whatever you want. That's the legal standard. So if I am afraid that you can take my life, then I'm allowed to take yours legally.
Where does the fear come from then? Like in the guys that do have the fear, it sounds like you think that a lot of them, or most of them do. Where does it?
I'm not afraid to say it. They were the people that were afraid before they came in, and just because you got a badge and a gun doesn't suddenly mean you're not afraid.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.